Okay, welcome back. This is actually video 3 of 3, I promise, for the mandalas. Um, I just want to talk about supplies again. Don't be afraid to use a simple pen if that's all you've got. It can be blue or black. It really doesn't matter. Heck, it could be purple if you really wanted. And a pencil. Always great. You can push harder, get darker lines, do it lighter if you wanted lighter lines. You could even shade in areas of these mandalas. So these are great tools to have if you don't have a Sharpie or a black marker. Also, if you have something maybe a little more fancy like a brush tip pen, those are always fun to use. Jelly rolls, especially if you have white, then you can draw on the darker areas, and I will show you how to use that. I also have another white gel pen that I really do like a lot better than the jelly rolls. I just think that the pigment is a little bit better. That is my personal opinion. Obviously, we're all kind of just using what we have. So I'm going to slide these out of the way and get started again, referencing my drawing guide here so that I can see different ideas and things as I'm working and kind of speed up this process for you guys. I'm going to put it in a little bit of fast forward after I get kind of going, but I have all 3 of the ones that I've done here. I'm going to start back with the first one, which was the Crayola marker that we added water over top of. And then I will move on to this one. And then just to, if I have time, I'll get into this one. I don't want to make the video super long for you guys. So I'm going to fast forward after I kind of get started so you can see how this whole process starts for me. Slide these guys out of the way. So when I'm working with this one, I'm thinking that I'm going to use my black brush pen. It gives me a variation of lines from thick to thin. Just to show you really quick. I can make a super thin line, not very straight, but I can make a thinner line and I can make thicker lines, and I can kind of color in areas pretty quickly with a brush tip pen. Now, again, your Crayola markers are going to work just as well as long as they don't have a really, so you can get just as thin a line with this as you can the brush pen, and then still filling in areas. But remember, if you ever want to add water over top of it, if you're using anything washable, that it will come up. I believe this is also washable, so I would never be able to add anything over top of it anyway. If you want something permanent, Sharpie's the way to go. Don't be afraid to use like a Sharpie pen if you want a fine line, or an ultra fine. Let me grab one. An ultrafine are super tiny tips so that you can get really skinny lines. I like these because they're a harder tip than like a brush pen would be, so I don't have to be light with my hand. So just to get started here, I actually think I'm going to go with the Sharpie. So that just feels better right now. I'm a little shaky for some reason. So I'm just going to start kind of doodling. It's really simple shapes and kind of tracing around where my watercolor was. This kind of looks like a sloppy mess, but you're going to see it kind of come to life here as we just add in some line work. Details really matter with mandalas. I'm sure you guys have seen some before. If you haven't, go ahead and look up Alyssa Burke. That is one of the links that I had given you when we first found out we weren't going to be at school. So it's in that initial letter, which is on both SchoolSpeak and on your Google Classrooms. And I'm taking her online course in mandala drawing right now. So that's been really helpful, kind of guiding me with what I should do with you guys, giving me tips and tricks and new ideas to kind of feed my lessons here. So I like making these lines kind of curve like they're leaves or petals. So kind of going from that center line and out. And don't be too precious with it. It doesn't have to be perfect to look good. So don't put that pressure on yourselves. Mine's not perfect, and it doesn't have to be. Now, I don't know if you guys can still see the pencil line there. I do like that pencil line, so I am probably going to trace that. Hopefully I can do as well as when I traced it using that lid. But again, not about being perfect right now. Something to remember while you are drawing: if you're pushing so hard that you can hear the marker squeaking as you go across the paper, then you're pushing too hard. Something that's fun to do is go back in and color in sections. Kind of gives a nice contrast, and contrast really helps to balance your art and give your eye something to move to. It is a principle of art. I'm gonna darken this circle up a little bit. There we go. Also on Alyssa Burke's website right now, if you can find her freebies for coloring pages, there's a lot of these in there. So then you could see maybe more detail of how she kind of layers and adds a lot more detail into hers. And don't be afraid to use those resources of the internet. I know you guys all have it at your fingertips, so jump on there and just Google mandala drawings. See if you can find other ideas, other guides that kind of give you different things you can draw on them. And I would love it if you guys came up with a excuse me, another shape other than just round. This is the one I kind of started with last summer, and I really do love just working in a circle. I have not seen or even tried to find anything that is a different shape, but that would be a great inspiration for some of us. So again, going with that contrast, I'm going to do a couple of things. One, add a darker dot here. Oops, I forgot to do that one. And then, now I forget what I was going to do. I'm just going to leave that for now. So switching back and forth between tools just gives me a different type of line. It's not necessarily that one is right and the other is wrong. It's just what I prefer. So if you like the thinner lines and the details that you can add with that, go for it. There is no real wrong answer here, just as long as you're working around and being, this is symmetry, and it's all symmetrical, because what happens on one side or the top of the circle also happens on the bottom, and what happens on the left side happens on the right. So as long as you're doing the same thing all the way around and you're consistent in your drawing, which might require you to slow down or use a ruler. Again, nothing wrong with that at all. I'm trying not to cover up too much of my color, but I might be covering up a little more than I wanted to, especially on this outside lines. That's why using a thicker marker is really not always the best idea, because it does cover up a lot of that color that we put down earlier. We're just kind of redefining where those watery lines kind of got blended in and mixed up and taken away. I'm working as quickly as I can here. Then I would probably go in and fill in these to kind of add a little more punch to the overall look. Make sure if you're coloring things in that you're kind of going slow around the edges, and then you can go faster when you get to the inside. Another great thing would be to take colored pencils, and you could either alternate between colored pencils and crayons, or you could color like really dark on the edges with your colored pencils or crayons and then lighter on the inside. That would be an awesome way to do this too. You could mix your crayons and watercolors if you have that option. So you could draw out some parts, some big pieces of your mandala, and then paint in the other pieces. That's always a fun way to do it. If you get to this point and you're kind of like, it needs something more, don't be afraid to add other stuff to it. Obviously, if I left this, I would want to erase that line that goes around the edge. I could also just bring in another colored marker and keep going, adding water. Since I did use Sharpie, none of my black lines will go anywhere, but realize that this purple and blue on the outside edge, anything that gets wet could still bleed out. Even though I said make sure you kind of do it quickly so that it doesn't dry up completely into the paper, it could still bleed a little bit. Since I'm using watercolor paper, it might not have saturated through the whole page. It's just an idea to get you started. There's so much more I could do to this. I could fill the whole page. I can add a zillion other details. I just kind of wanted to give you the basics of how to make this turn into something more artistic than just watercolor blobs. All right, moving on. For this one, I'm not going to talk you through it. I'm just going to kind of work, and I might speed up the video, so hang on, and I will probably introduce my white gel pen to this so that you can kind of see how we can use that as well in some of those darker areas where there's purples and dark blues. I love how this turned out. I'm really surprised at how the purple kind of stands out against the blue back here, and the yellows really spread in the reds in that center. So here we go. What I have, and the outside is not as straight as I wanted it. I'm just going to kind of close that circle off to give it some boundaries here, so it doesn't feel quite so off or not enclosed. That's what I would do with this. If I had maybe a little more time, I might add some more white in here where the purple is. But for now, I think that's a great start. It's always fun to start a mandala and then kind of go back and think about where else you could add other types of lines. Sometimes I like to go over things weeks later or months or years even in my sketchbooks or wherever, and just be like, oh, that could use this, and I didn't think about that before, so I'm going to use it now. Sometimes it's discovering a new art supply. Sometimes it's finding that I really am like in love with my gold paint pen right now. So I like to add a little bit of gold to things, so I could go back and do that. You can always paint over it, do something completely different too. Maybe you just don't like it and it ends up in the recycle bin. I would love to see what you guys are capable of doing with these two ideas. This is the same as this, basically, but using Crayola markers. So feel free to take this idea from when I painted with watercolors and take it over to your Crayola marker one. It's the same simple building of lines. You could add in fun shapes. You can, just repeat patterns like I've been doing. I did a lot of the same things in this one that I did over here, but you see how very different these two mandalas are. Change it up, try something new. Don't be afraid to think outside of the box and have fun. That's the whole point. I hope this helps, and I hope that you guys have a blast with this, and I can't wait to see what you create. Have a great weekend. Happy spring break.